All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us for this informational session and public hearing. So tonight we're going to be talking about beacon recycling in Muskegon. So hopefully that's why you all have joined us. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping things, and then I'm going to go ahead and introduce the staff that we have on today. But first of all, I just want to let everybody know that your lines are going to be muted during the meeting. We will have the ability to unmute you during a question and answer portion and also during the actual comment period. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's going to work in just a minute. This is also going to be recorded, or it is being recorded, I guess, currently. So all of our public meetings and hearings, we do post on Eagle's YouTube channel. That's at YouTube/Michigan Eagle. So if you're interested in those, or if you have to jump off early and you would like to watch what happened after you left, you can feel free to do that on YouTube. That should be posted, I would say today's Tuesday, probably towards the end of the week. We do transcribe those so that if there is a reason someone may need us in another language, they can read in a different language once that transcription is also posted. So any questions on that, you can definitely let me know and we can talk about that a little bit more. I want to just talk briefly about how things are going to work tonight. So we have two kind of separate sections of the evening. The first section is going to be what we're calling the informational session. So that during that session, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in a couple minutes here, but that's going to be where we kind of share some information about the Air Quality Division, about Eagle, about the Air Quality Division, about the draft permit conditions, how those were formulated, and then we will answer your questions. So during that part of the night, we'll be able to kind of have a little bit of a discussion, some give and take, things like that. Once we get to that second portion of the night, when we get to the public hearing, during that portion is when we're going to be only taking comments on the record. So that will be officially opened with a statement. We'll take any comments that you would like to give on the record, and then we'll close the hearing. So that's a little bit more formalized where we're not communicating back and forth with you. So I always want to just make sure that I go over that so folks aren't surprised at how that works. So just talking quickly about how you can ask a question if you would like to do that. Once we get to that question and answer part, we have a great bunch of panelists, and I'm going to introduce those to you in just a minute. But you can go ahead and use that question and answer box on your screen and just type in your question. A lot of times people like to do that as the informational session is going on. If something pops up or you're confused about some of the information that was given, please feel free to do that. We love when people ask questions. You can also click that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. When we get to the sort of end of the informational part, we open up things for question and answer. I don't think we have anybody calling in, but I'll remind folks of this in case we do later. You're just going to press #2 on your phone, and that will sort of virtually raise your hand for us. So the first thing I want to do when I'm talking about the agenda is introduce our air quality staff. But the first person I want to introduce to you all is Marianne Dolahanty. And so Marianne, if you want to just turn your camera on, I know you want to officially sort of welcome everybody to the meeting tonight, but Marianne is our Air Quality Division Director, and she's also the decision maker for this project. So Marianne, go ahead if you would like to take the floor for a minute.
Sure. Can you hear me, Jen? So I assume yes.
Yes, you sound great. Sorry, I nodded, but I didn't say anything.
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay.
Well, that was
I
not
couldn't
helpful.
see the nod. So not a problem. So thanks, Jen. I appreciate you giving me some time to welcome folks. But I did just want to take a few moments to say thanks for joining us tonight, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend this public hearing. I hope tonight affords you an opportunity to ask us questions about the project proposed by Beacon Recycling to install a new scrap metal shredder. We'll be providing some insight into our Air Quality Division permitting process, what it took us to get to this point, including what Beacon is doing or proposing to do, and hopefully be able to answer some of those questions, as I said, before we get to the official hearing portion of our virtual event tonight. So it's a beautiful day here in Lansing where I'm at. I assume it's beautiful where you all are. So I know it takes you away from other things. And again, I really sincerely appreciate it. Public participation is very important to us in Eagle, and in particular in Air Quality Division. It's a very valuable part of our work. So whether you're here to listen or you're planning to make a comment during the hearing, I do definitely appreciate you being here. So the comments that you provide tonight about projects like this one are very helpful to us to ensure that all aspects of what Beacon is proposing they're all thoughtfully and thoroughly reviewed and considered. We'll take all of your comments into consideration. I'll be aware of them, read them, talk to staff about them prior to making a decision on the proposal. So we will also communicate, Jen will go into this a little bit more at the end, communicate with you all regarding the final decision once it's made, so that you're aware of that decision. So at this point, again, thanks for being with us tonight, and I will pass it back to Jen so she can get us moving through the rest of the evening.
All right, thank you so much, Marianne. I appreciate it. I want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up. I should have said my own name. So I'm Jennifer Dixon, and I apologize for that. I work in our environmental support division here at Eagle. So I'm going to be hosting the meeting tonight. If my panelists that I have on could just turn their cameras on really quick so I can introduce all of you briefly, and you'll get to talk with these people more after the info session. But one person I do want to introduce is Joel Roseberry, and he is going to be co-hosting. He's one of my coworkers that I work very closely with. He's going to share some information out in the chat with you. So if you find that valuable, please feel free to go ahead and download those pieces of information as well. So you just met Marianne. Like I said, she's the decision maker on this project. Another person you're going to be hearing a lot from tonight is Chukwu Oj, and he is the permit engineer on the project. So he's going to be giving sort of the bulk of the kind of presentation that we have tonight. So we'll be hearing a lot from him. We're also going to be hearing from April Lazaro, and she's an inspector out of our Grand Rapids district office. So she's very familiar with these types of processes. And so she'll be a great person to talk about what an inspector does if a permit would be issued for this shredder. I have Stephanie Hangsbaugh. She is our air modeler for this project. So when I talk about air modeling, and you'll hear a little bit more about this when Chukwu's talking, we're talking about using a computer to look at what Beacon is requesting and see where those air emissions might be impacting the areas around the facility. So her job is a really important part of this project. Also have Mike Deppa, and he's a toxicologist on this project. So toxicologists in general work with health-based screening levels of certain contaminants, and they make sure that anything that a company might be emitting would meet those screening levels. So that's a big part of what Mike does. And in this case in particular, he did a special deposition look at Mercury because of the kind of facility this is. So he would be able to answer questions about that. The other person that we have on is Erica Wolfe, and she works in our air monitoring department. So that's a little bit different than modeling. And I know sometimes those two terms can get confusing. But what her job is working with the monitors in the state that are stationary. They're put in certain places around the state, and they measure for pollutants in the breathing zone. So we call that the ambient air, or in the breathing zone, where the general public would be. So got a lot of great staff people on today. Hopefully I don't think I missed anybody. No, I didn't. I did good. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that. So just a quick, so panelists, you guys can go ahead, except for Chukwu, you go ahead and leave your camera on, but everybody else, if you want to turn yours off and just make sure you're muted for the presentation, that would be great. So we are going to talk about the presentation on this proposed permit. So we're going to talk about what Beacon has asked us for. Then we're going to get to that question and answer session. Once we're done with the question and answer session, or at 7 o'clock, whichever one comes first, we're going to go right into that public hearing. So just a reminder, the hearing portion, we won't be having that back and forth conversation at all with all of you. After the hearing portion, I'm going to just talk about other ways that you can submit a comment. A lot of times people are not ready to submit comments during these kind of events, and that's perfectly okay. We've left a bunch of extra time after this is over for you to submit those other comments. The comment period doesn't end until August 22nd. So you have plenty of time to do that. And I'll go over other ways that you can let us know what you think about things. We'll talk a little bit about where you can find other information, but like I said, Joel is sharing some of that out with you tonight. And then we'll talk about how you can get a hold of us if you have other questions. So without further ado, Chukwu, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and share your screen over mine. And as soon as you're ready, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Jen. Like Jen mentioned, my name is Chukwu Oj, and I'm the lead permit engineer who worked with a team of air quality staff here at Eagle to review the Beacon Recycling air permit application. Before we get into the details of the project, I would like to briefly talk about what the Air Quality Division does and how the permitting process works. We all know that pollution comes from many different things, such as big farms, fuel burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. The overall mission of the Air Quality Division is to protect public health and the environment. We provide this protection by using our authority under the state and federal laws through the regulation of industrial sources. AQD staff do many different things. For example, we monitor levels of air pollutants. We look at different toxics to make sure public health is protected. We conduct inspections of regulated facilities, such as the facility we are talking about tonight. And we review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to ensure the operations comply with the rules and regulations in place to protect public health. The Air Quality Division has authority to permit sources of air pollutants. However, I do want to point out a few items that the permit does not cover and that the AQD does not have the ability to regulate. You will want to talk to your local government if you have questions or concerns about issues such as zoning, noise, and traffic. Additionally, the AQD does not determine whether a facility is needed when reviewing an air permit application. We evaluate a project to ensure that it meets the applicable rules and regulations. Lastly, a permit issued by the AQD does not supersede requirements for other permits or local zoning regulations. Facilities must comply with all applicable rules to be able to operate. Now, I'd like to give a simple overview of the steps the company and the AQD go through to get to a proposed draft permit ready for public comments. First, a company like Beacon decides that they would like to install, modify, or construct a piece of equipment. Then, the company submits a permit application to the AQD. Next, the application goes through a review during which the engineer evaluates the information the company submitted as it relates to the state and federal air quality regulations. If the project appears to meet the rules and regulations, the engineer creates a proposed draft permit. Once a proposed draft permit is reviewed by the AQD inspector, it is sent to the company for review, and in certain cases, such as this one, the proposed permit is posted for public comment. Public comment is a very important part of the permitting process, and anyone can comment on the proposed permit, including the company. Once the comment period ends, all comments received are evaluated and can potentially impact the permitting decision. Finally, a decision is made on the permit. This decision may be to approve the permit as written, or it may be to approve the permit with changes, or it may be to deny the permit. The decision is based on the ability of the company's proposal to meet the air regulations. We cannot base our decision on the need or popularity of a proposal. So now this brings us to Beacon and what they are proposing. As most of you are aware, Beacon is proposing to install a scrap metal shredder for processing cars and other scrap metal. The proposed shredder also includes equipment for the separation and removal of waste material from the product. Since this would be a new source of emissions and no exemptions apply, the shredder will require a permit from the AQD. While reviewing the proposed project, the AQD looks at a number of rules that will apply specifically to that project. When reviewing the Beacon application, we looked at the following. We looked at any applicable state and federal rules. We also evaluated the proposed emissions and impacts against those rules. We also looked at whether the rules required additional controls. We also looked at our air toxics rules, and we performed air modeling. At the end of the day, what we wanted to know is, will Beacon meet these rules? As part of the permit review, we looked at different ways for Beacon to limit emissions of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. This is done under Rule 702, which requires facilities to control emissions based on the best available controls, taking into account such things as cost and technical feasibility. The review of the permit led to the following requirements for Beacon. They will have to remove materials that contain VOCs prior to shredding. So this might be gasoline or oils, or other similar materials. Additionally, Beacon will be limited on the amount of scrap they can process on an annual basis. And finally, Beacon will have an emission limit on VOCs and will have to track their emissions. Throughout the review process and during the development of the proposed draft permit, the AQD has ensured that the applicable state and federal rules will be met. And one such example of this is computer simulations, referred to as modeling. In this application, we looked at PM10 and PM2.5 modeling, which was done to see if particulate emissions would comply with the national standards. The modeling is done using an EPA-approved computer program that shows what the impacts will be for the proposed shredder and takes into account both the equipment and the facility. This review led to the following requirements for Beacon. They will be limited on the amount of scrap they can process on a daily basis. They will also have an emission limit for PM2.5, and Beacon will be required to track both the amount of scrap that they process per day and the emissions as well. Moving on. When it comes to mercury, the AQD pays special attention to potential impacts on nearby sources of water. In this case, we look at mercury deposition. When we talk about deposition, we're talking about a thing being added to some area through a pathway. So think of something being deposited somewhere. And again, a computer model was used to look at the potential impacts on nearby sources of water. This review led to some of the following requirements for Beacon. First, they will have to remove all mercury-containing materials from the scrap metal before shredding. So this would include items like mercury switches that can be found in older vehicles. Beacon will also have a mercury emission limit, and they will have to track both the activities of removing these mercury-containing materials, and they'll have to track their emissions. Next, we looked at air toxics and specifically screening levels. And screening levels are designed to protect against health issues like developing cancer or breathing problems. Most of the screening levels are for individual pollutants, and most of the pollutants in this review were evaluated that way. Impacts from Beacon's proposed emissions are below the health-based screening levels, and furthermore, Beacon will have emission limits on both mercury and hexavalent chromium, and they will have to track those emissions. Next, let's talk about what many of you might be interested in, and that would be how Beacon will control dust. Dust can come from piles of material on site or can come from the shredder itself. And to ensure that dust does not leave Beacon's property, the AQD requires what we call the Fugitive Dust Plan. The Fugitive Dust Plan would require Beacon to define where dust may come from and how that dust will be controlled. And Beacon must properly manage the whole site to prevent dust from leaving their property. This review led to some of the following requirements for Beacon. Beacon will have to use water sprays when the shredder is in operation. Beacon will also have to frequently apply water to various scrap and waste piles on site, and they will have to track all dust control related activities performed. Next, let's talk about how Beacon's responsibility to ensure the removal of materials from scrap metal. The AQD, in recognition of the potential for nuisances to occur from the shredder, requires operators of shredders to have what we refer to as a materials management plan. And this is a plan for removing materials from scrap metal meant before the scrap metal enters the shredder. These materials that must be removed include refrigerants, oils, gasoline, and other materials that can lead to odors, dust, fires, and other nuisances. And the plan is meant to ensure that these nuisances do not occur. This review led to some of the following requirements for Beacon. As mentioned, they will have to remove materials from scrap metal, and they will have to track all of their activities related to materials management. Other requirements, some of which have been mentioned before, include visible emissions and opacity monitoring, monitoring of various activities on site related to the shredder and fugitive dust control, and record keeping. And these requirements together will be used to show that the shutter will comply with its permit limits. These requirements in the proposed permit will ensure that Beacon will comply with the rules and regulations. So in summary, the review of the application led to the following. There are limits on emissions and materials processed. There are monitoring, record-keeping requirements, and these together would allow Beacon to comply with the applicable regulations. Additionally, approval of this permit in any form, either as is or with changes based on public comments on the proposed conditions, does not mean that Beacon has the permission needed to begin operation. Any required local zoning or permitting would still need to be applied for and received via the appropriate channels. And now I'm going to pass it on to April, who will talk about doing inspections.
Thanks, Chuku. Again, my name is April Lazaro, and I'm happy to be here today. I am an Air Quality Division inspector in the Grand Rapids District. There are a number of ways that inspectors check compliance at facilities. And one is by inspections, and those are usually unannounced. And by unannounced, that means that we typically do not call first to let a company know that we are on our way. We typically show up, knock on the door, introduce ourselves, show our credentials, and inform the company that we are here to conduct an inspection. So you might wonder what exactly occurs during an inspection with the Air Quality Division. And like I mentioned, it's the inspector arriving on site, introducing themselves, identifying the purpose of the visit. And then what we do is we walk around the facility and we look at everything related to the permit, as well as any other state and federal regulations that might apply. So this means that we're physically walking around, looking at the equipment, we're watching the operation of the equipment, and we're looking at any stacks or control devices. And then we follow that up with a records review to ensure that companies are actually maintaining the records that are required by the permit. And I usually use the permit as a guide, as a starting place for when I'm conducting an inspection, and that way that the company and myself know that we're on the same page and we're talking about the same things. New sources are typically inspected within the first year of startup, and then they're inspected regularly thereafter. Another type of inspection that an inspector might do would be one that's in response to a complaint. And a complaint and investigation is very similar to a compliance inspection and would include a lot of the same features that I just described that occur during a compliance inspection. But we're typically also going to focus on an area of which we think the problem might be occurring. And so that might be, if the fugitive dust complaint occurs, then we're going to be focusing on those plans, the fugitive dust plan and the materials management plan that Chuku mentioned earlier. After we conduct an inspection, whether it's an unannounced inspection like I described or a complaint investigation, a report is written. All of our compliance inspections are posted online once they're finalized to Eagle's air quality website, and inspections that are conducted at facilities across the state are available to the public at any time from our website. That's what I have, and I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer to bring us into the question and answer portion of the night.
Thanks a lot to both of you. Greatly appreciate it. You guys can go ahead and leave your cameras on because I'm going to have both of you as panelists. And if my other panelists want to go ahead and turn their cameras on, that would be also great. I'm going to put everybody's names back up here just so if folks have questions and want to kind of know who they're talking to, we'll have everybody there. So just remember, if we do have questions that we want to ask, you can type your question into that question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. You can raise your hand and I will unmute your line so you can ask your question verbally. So that's also a choice for you. And then you can if you're calling in, it doesn't look like we have any caller-inners. That's probably not actual word, anyone calling in. So if we do have anybody, they would just be able to press #2 on their phone and it would raise their hand. So I wanted to just say, April, I appreciate how you tied in a lot of the plans. We talked about how those plans that are in this proposed permit would be used if the permit was approved and you were out on site. So I think that's one of those things that not every single source type has those kind of plans associated with it. So it's something that we don't get to talk about very often when we have these kinds of informational sessions. So I appreciated that you did that for sure, because it's just one of those things. I think sometimes people don't understand that that's actually part of the permit and you use it as to determine compliance at the same time you would use any other permit condition. All right, so I'm dilly-dallying around a little bit. I can tell everybody can tell that. Everyone just want to make sure that everyone has plenty of time to formulate a question if they have one tonight. So just a couple of reminders as I'll let you guys ponder what questions you might have for the panel. And we'll go over this again too in a minute when we do the hearing portion. But this public comment period will stay open until, like I said, August 22nd. So I'll show you a little bit more later, but some of the other ways that you can submit comments if you're not ready to do that tonight is you can call our voicemail box, you can send us an email, you can send us a letter in the mail. It can be written on a napkin. We don't really care. We'll take it whatever way you want to give it to us. So we're very, very open to that. All right, well, I'm going to give you just like another minute to see if there's any questions, and otherwise, as long as Mary Ann's okay with that, we can always go right into the hearing portion of the night as well. All right, I'm just going to double check that nobody has their hand up because I don't want to step on anyone's toes. I want to make sure you get your questions answered if you need them. Mary Ann, I don't see any questions. Are you okay with me going into the hearing portion of the night?
Yes, that'd be fine.
All right, well, panelists, thank you so much for being on. Appreciate it. If you guys want to go ahead and turn your cameras off, and then Mary Ann and I will get right into that hearing portion of the night. All right, so this is going to be kicking off that official hearing. And to do that, I do need to just read a formal statement to everybody just to kick that off. And then again, we'll talk a little bit about how you can submit a comment tonight if you have one. All right, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon. I am with the Environmental Support Division of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, and I will be the hearing officer tonight. We have Mary Ann Dolahanty, Air Quality Division Director, the decision maker for this permit application, listening to your comments this evening. She will be considering all comments prior to making her decision. This hearing is for a proposed permit to install for the Beacon Recycling Incorporated plant located at 1241 East Keating Avenue in Muskegon. In this proposed permit, Beacon is requesting to install a new scrap metal shredder at their existing scrap metal facility. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Before the company can make the requested installation, they must obtain a permit that meets the requirements of Michigan's air quality laws. This means the equipment must be capable of meeting state and federal emission standards, including health-based standards. The proposed permit must also contain conditions that include emission limits and specific ways of operating the equipment to ensure that those emission limits are met. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in the proposed installation an opportunity to provide information the department may use in deciding whether to approve the permit to install or if there are additional issues to consider. Please note the proposed permit to install is still a draft permit. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope that having the details of the draft permit available will help you in providing comments. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether the permit will be granted at all. Please recognize the department can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria the department must use in making a decision. For example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within the department's authority. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition of the proposed project. We will be happy to make note of your position, but please understand that the department is, by law, not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed project. This hearing will be recorded and your comments will be part of the information the department will consider in making its decision on the proposed project. The public comment period for the proposed permit began on July 7th, 2022, and will end at midnight on August 22, 2022. I think I got that. Additional comments or information may be submitted through that time via written or verbal comment during this hearing, by email, or by voicemail. After the close of the public comment period, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision on the permit application will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reasons for the change. In all three scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. Included in the mailing will be a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. As stated previously, you may submit a written comment at any time during the comment period by US Post or email, or you may call into the public comment voicemail. You may also type the word comment into your question box tonight and submit your comment. I will read all comments aloud as you submit them unless you state do not read. If you would like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I will unmute your line so you can speak. We will limit your comment time to about 3 minutes. If you're speaking, I will try to let you know when you have about 30 seconds left. I will do my best to address commenters in the order your hands were raised, but please bear with us as the technology does have challenges for doing that. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed project and to listen to those comments. Thank you so much for your attention. I will now begin calling the names of anyone who would like to make a comment. So now is your opportunity to raise your hand if you would like to, or if you want to put something in the question and answer box, you can do that as well. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. I know sometimes it can be challenging to kind of formulate what comments you might have. Okay, Marianne, I don't see any hands raised or any comments in the question and answer box. Are you okay with me closing the hearing down? Okay, so to close the hearing, I need to read a closing statement. It's a lot shorter than the opening statement, just letting everybody know. And then we'll move on to a couple other things that we need to go over tonight. All right. So thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this meeting tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on August 22nd, 2022. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed. Thank you again. All right, a couple other things just to go over before I let everybody go tonight. You're more than welcome to leave early, but want to go over a couple other things with you just in case you need this information. So talked a little bit about other ways that you can submit official comments. This is really important. So we, like I said, take comments any way you want to give them to us pretty much. You can send us a letter. So you can just send that to the Eagle Air Quality Permit Section, PO Box 3260, Lansing, Michigan 48909. A lot of times people feel very comfortable submitting email comments to us. We love that as well. So that email address is eagle-aqd-pti public comments, and PTI public comments is all one word, as you can see on the screen, and that's at michigan.gov. Or one of the easiest ways I think is relatively new, and that's just calling our voicemail and leaving us a message. So that number is 517-284-0900. And all the information that we talked about tonight, I know Joel shared with you all the proposed project summary, the technical fact sheet. So that's going to contain a lot of the high level information, and then kind of the technical review. You can find that and a lot more information on our website at michigan.gov/Eagle Air Public Notice. So you're going to find information about other permits that are going to be open for comment and all kinds of great things like that. So at that same place, like I said, you can find that proposed project summary. So just to kind of go over, that is a very high level overview of what the facility is asking for. Some of our review, we talk about our environmental justice evaluations, translation evaluations. So some things that are sort of outside that kind of technical look at the permit application itself. Talk about some of the air quality in the area. So again, things that are sort of outside of that application that might be of interest. That technical fact sheet is going to be kind of a deep dive into rules, regulations, why the permit was written the way it was drafted, things like that. You're going to have those proposed permit terms and conditions that you can look at. If this is your first time looking at air permits, and we don't do a lot of stuff on the west side of the state, so if you're new to it, no worries. Chuku is great to talk to, and he's more than happy to kind of talk to you about what does the condition mean and how are they set up. And then you can also find links to the recordings of the meetings like this one. So like I said, we will be posting this a little bit later this week in case you want to check it out again, or you missed something, or whatever the case may be. You want to look at some other of our meetings that we posted previously, that's totally fine as well. So I've got this up on the screen right now. This is just everybody that you can contact for information. You might notice that on inspections, we have Heidi Hollenbach instead of April Lazaro, and that's because April is not assigned to this particular facility. We have another inspector that's assigned, and he wasn't able to be with us tonight. But one of the main people you might want to talk to is Chuku OJ. So he, like I said, is a great person to ask questions to, and you heard from him tonight. So, all right, I'm gonna leave the screen up just for a second here, just to make sure that everything's good. You guys can copy some stuff down if you need to. And then I wanna just thank you for coming, and Heidi's email is wrong, April just told me. So April, thank you. Good thing we got off that screen. If you're looking for Heidi, or you want to talk to the actual inspector, Scott Evans, he's the one who couldn't be here tonight. You can always reach out to Chuku. He can help hook you up with anybody that you need to chat with as well. So thank you so much again for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Like Marianne said in the very beginning, we know folks have a lot of other things that they could be doing with their evening. And so anytime we have people taking the time out to join us, we just really, really appreciate it. And we're grateful for any comments or feedback that you might give us. So thank you so much. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.